Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Art of Photography. My name is Ted Forbes, and today we've got kind of a wacky title on the show, and I'm calling this What Would Weegee Do? And Weegee is, the great New York crime scene photographer that I covered a few months ago, and one of my favorite photographers. And I want to talk about marketing today. And this is something that is a little bit foreign concept. It's very difficult for artists to usually do, and it's not something I've covered on the show before. The reason I incorporated Weegee into the title is I do have two historic examples of people that I think kind of overcame a lot of odds in their careers, and they're great examples for people to learn from. And anyway, so I think they're well worth discussing. But the idea for this show came up in the last couple of weeks. I've talked to several friends, and we've been talking about what we're working on with our websites and how we're getting our work out and getting eyeballs on what we do. And I think for most artists, marketing is really difficult. A lot of people are very frustrated. I hear this from viewers a lot that I feel the same way sometimes. You're putting your work on the internet. Maybe you're using Tumblr or Flickr or something like that. Maybe you got your own website. And how do you get eyeballs on that? And how do you get people to look at your work? And and sometimes it really doesn't have much to do with how good you are. Because we've all noticed this, and I'll be very humble and say this. There are photographers who are way, way better than I am, and very obscure because their work isn't out there and they don't have the kind of attention around what they do. Consequently, you can look at the other way around. There are people who are way more popular than I am. There are photography shows on the internet that are way more popular than this one, done by people who don't. Their content's a little questionable sometimes, but they market well. And that's the hard part, I think, for most artists to understand, is that they're separate entities that need to work together, but they still are separate. And I think when I was first starting out, a lot of times I just felt like, well, if I just keep doing better work and doing better work, this is what's going to catapult, because people will take note. That there is some truth to that, and you want to do better work, if for nothing else for yourself, but it just doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to get your work out there and it's going to be seen. There's a lot more to it than that. The other thing that makes this a little bit of a challenge to talk about with you guys is that marketing and promotion really is different for everybody. So what works for me may be totally different for you, which may be completely different from somebody else. But I think if you break it down into a couple, I like to break what we do as photographers down into one of two things. So you could think of, if you're doing something commercially, in other words, you are creating work and getting paid for it somehow. So that marketing element in there, you're either selling one of two things. You're selling photography as a service, or you're selling photography as a product. So for instance, if you're selling it as a service, this means, you are going to hire me to photograph your wedding, or you are going to hire me to photograph this, or maybe I'm a photojournalist, or go to a sporting event and photograph the game. So the service of photography is what's being sold in that case. And then there's also photography as a product, and photography as a product is usually the end result. So this could be fine art if you're selling a framed piece in a gallery, for instance. It could be stock photography if you're selling your work and it's being used in magazines, publications, and the like. So those are basically the breakdown, and those are two very different career paths, and even within those there's a big difference in the way a wedding photographer needs to market themselves versus what somebody who's doing photojournalism is going to want to do. So anyway, so it's a wide gamut to cover, so I'm not going to get everything totally covered in this episode. I'm going to keep it kind of general and give you guys some ideas for things. But anyway, what I want you to do is go ahead and watch this episode, and I think for future episodes it would be really cool is if you would leave a comment for me and just let me know what you feel like your biggest challenge of getting eyeballs on your work is. What is your biggest challenge online? What is your biggest challenge in terms of, I'm putting this work out there, how do I get people to see it? And I want to know what you guys are kind of thinking on that, and this will kind of help shape some things that I can address down the line. Because like I said, this is not something we really cover a lot of on this show. We normally do a lot of photo history or techniques or stuff like that. So it's kind of a new thing, but I think it's very important. And if you want to think of it as like Art of Photography Pro Edition or something, maybe we could do some videos that kind of address some of those points. So leave me a comment after you've watched this episode, and we'll go into it in further detail there. Okay, so I mentioned that there were two historical examples that I wanted to give you that I think they're fun stories, they're wonderful photographers, but I think that there is a lesson to be learned. And the first one I always want to talk about, because I put his name in the show, is Weegee. We did an episode on Weegee several months ago. I'll link up to that at the end of the show. And Weegee is an amazing photographer, fabulous, bizarre individual in some cases, who had this just wonderful talent for mixing photojournalism, crime scene photography, a wild personality, and even a little bit of black comedy that all kind of culminate in what he did. And the interesting thing is Weegee did not work as a fine art photographer back in his time. He worked as a commercial photographer. But the interesting thing about Weegee, and he's been on record as saying this in interviews, and I think this is what applies to, you know, if you want to think about marketing or you want to think about the hustle or getting your work out there. And remember, during Weegee's life, there was no internet, there was no social media. I mean, it was all pick up the phone, go over and talk to somebody. It was really old school. And so what Weegee did is he realized that there was a niche for crime scene photography and nobody was fulfilling it. He realized that the newspapers wanted to get stuff hot off the press, they wanted to get it out, and he could charge money for that, and pretty good money at that case. And so literally what he did is he, you know, figured out, he was using, you know, for the most part, a Crown View camera, Crown Graphic, and he figured out with a flash bulb how far his subjects needed to be in focus. So really there was nothing to set. He could walk up, position himself, and take the image. So he got his process down, which is amazing because when you have that much of a defined process to still be creative within it, and you're going to notice that in a lot of his work a lot of times is, yes, there is kind of a finite focus point. Not all the time, but quite often. So he would go hang out at the police station and didn't have, you know, license to do this or paperwork or permission or anything, and he would hang out and listen to the police scanner and you know, shoot the bull with cops. And as soon as he heard something, he would go jump in his car, beat them to the crime scene, get the photos that he needed, and because he wanted to get them to the media quick, he had a darkroom set up in the back of his truck. So literally he would go in there, develop the images, get them out, and boom, gone. And he turned an entire career out of this. There was nobody else that was working this hard to do that. There was nobody else that was this clever to do that at that time. And later the business changed, and you know, the news outlets needed this kind of speed and immediacy with images. So, you know, people who actually worked for the photo news agencies and whatnot came into play. But I think Weegee was really ahead of his time. And, you know, what a great example of being able to hustle and be motivated and do things and figure it out. And so Weegee was the first example I wanted to use in terms of marketing. You've got to figure out what it is you want to do, and then you have to figure out who's willing to pay for that in a professional capacity, and then it's a matter of trying to find a link between the two. And I think that's pretty interesting. The second guy that I want to mention today is also equally fascinating, and it's the great war photographer Robert Capa. Robert Capa is extremely famous in terms of being a photojournalist. Probably best known for many things, but among them the actual D-Day photos where he joined the troops where they were storming the beaches at Normandy. These were photos that, very interesting story unto themselves and would be worth an entire episode to talk about, but they were essentially damaged, and what you see is really rough, but it really ends up, a lot of people feel that these portray a mystique and emotion. It was not intentional, but there's a real cool thing coming off of these photos as I'm rolling these over the top. Anyway, Robert Capa, when he started out, Robert Capa was born Andre Friedman in Hungary. He was a Jewish-Hungarian photographer, moved to Germany, unfortunately, right around the time the Nazis were coming into power. And because of the, you know, preconceptions and discrimination against Jews in the world of photojournalism, you know, Andre had to figure a way around this. And so he and his girlfriend at the time, who was Gerda Taro, actually created a persona, and they created a photographer named Robert Capa. They liked the name because it sounded a little bit like Frank Capra, who was the American film director. So they created this guy who was Robert Capa. And his girlfriend Gerda would actually be kind of, you know, the person who booked the shots, and she would talk to people, and it was very difficult to meet the Robert Capa because, you know, they were creating a mystique around it, and he was so busy and always off on photo shoots. And this worked. They were able to beat the stereotype. Actually, in the early days, I believe she actually took some of the photos as well, and so together they were Robert Capa. And of course, then Andre Friedman just became known as Robert Capa moving forward. But, you know, he found a way to overcome it and get in there, and his first widely published series of photos are simply amazing. I'll put them over the top here too, but they were basically taken of Trotsky giving this speech at the meaning. It was basically the speech in Copenhagen on the meaning of the Russian Revolution in 1932, and they're such intense shots. And anyway, this was his first gig that he sold as Robert Capa. So once again, I think just like Weegee in a lot of ways, you look at somebody who was very talented, very hungry, and they had to find a way that didn't have anything to do with the quality of images they took to do promotion, to self-promote, to get their career going. And I think these two are wonderful historic examples, and I think there's just so much we can learn from that, because as much it's changed in the world in terms of what we do now. I mean, we have the internet, and the world is a smaller place, and then all the channels and ways you could do things on the internet. as interesting as that all is, I think, historically, when you look at what it comes down to, essentially, it's doing good work and then finding a clever way of having your own angle on it. And I think that still holds up today, which, I think these are two wonderful examples of this. So to wrap this up, what I want to do is I want to bring this into, a more modern context for you guys who watch the show and for what I do even. And I want to know what you guys think, and I want to know what some of the difficulties and the challenges are that you guys have. Marketing is different now because there is a lot more competition than, either one of the historical examples that I gave you. We do live in a world where it seems like we're oversaturated and bombarded with images, particularly photographs. I think it would be interesting to see, I'm sure somebody's done a study on, how many times the average person, how many images we see a day, and it's a lot because you think about billboard advertisement, what's on television, what we see on the internet, what we thumb through a magazine, we look at a newspaper, and how many photographs are involved with all those things. It is a saturated world in those terms. I think it also, cameras are more accessible, they're more affordable than they've ever been, and you do have more competition of people who think it's fun to be a photographer, and I think you have more competition with people who are very talented as photographers too. It's not just like, this amateur mob that's stealing jobs from anybody. I mean, there really are a lot of good photographers these days. Having said all that though, and you guys know that I like to be very positive on this show and I try to be very upbeat. And what's important to me is that the takeaway on this is to be somewhat inspirational, because I still believe that in all of that sea of stuff, you've got to find a way to stand out and be a little bit different. And I think it can be done still. You see people doing it all the time. There are young photographers who are gaining notoriety. I know several people who are making their living doing photography full-time, even on a local commercial scale. It can be done. And so what I'm interested with you guys, and maybe you don't have any aspirations of being like a pro photographer necessarily, but when you're trying to promote your own work and get eyeballs on it and get feedback, or maybe, let's be honest, we all try to feed our egos. We put images online, we want people to like them and say so. That's hard. And what are some of you guys what are some of the challenges that you see that are there? Because I'm interested in knowing what those are. And we'll come back around to this in future episodes. But anyway, that's enough for today. And once again, I'll see you guys in the next video. This has been The Art of Photography. Catch you next time. Later.